In the shadowed hollows of eastern Kentucky, where the mist clings to the hills like an uninvited memory, there existed a family whose name was whispered in terror and fascination alike. The year was 1889, a time when the land was still raw from the scars of the Civil War, and the Appalachian woods held secrets that townsfolk feared to name aloud. At the heart of this story was the clan of the Hollow, a lineage whose devotion was neither to church nor to country but to fire, death, and the dark rituals that bound them together in a grim tapestry of obsession. Ezekiel Hollow, the patriarch, was a man of striking presence, his eyes sharp yet distant, as though they peered into realms the rest of humanity could never perceive. Locals described him as both magnetic and repelling, a figure whose mere glance could leave a person uneasy, caught between fascination and dread. He had built a homestead atop a ridge, away from prying eyes, with wooden beams blackened by smoke and a permanent scent of scorched earth lingering in the wind. This house was not merely a dwelling, it was a monument to their creed, an altar to forces unseen. Ezekiel's children, tall, gaunt, and oddly synchronized in their movements, were the inheritors of his convictions. They performed tasks and rituals that seemed incomprehensible to outsiders. At night, villagers claimed, they would gather in the clearing behind their home, lighting fires whose smoke twisted into forms that resembled human shapes dancing in the darkness. The flames were more than light. They were symbols of purification, judgment, and perhaps a warning that trespassers were never welcome. The family never spoke to outsiders without purpose, and even then, words were sparse and sharp, leaving an air of unease that lingered long after any encounter. The first incidents that drew attention were subtle livestock found charred in the barns, strange symbols etched into tree trunks, and faint, echoing chants that carried through the wind at twilight. Neighbors initially dismissed these as superstition, the natural wariness of rural communities interpreting unexplained events through lenses of fear and folklore. But when travelers vanished along the winding dirt roads, leaving behind only scorched footprints and traces of smoke, curiosity shifted to horror. A single carefully preserved note found in the Hollow's property warned, "Fire is the path, death is the guide." No one could tell if it was a threat or an explanation. Local law enforcement, already strained by the rough terrain and scattered population, approached the Hollow homestead cautiously. Deputies spoke of the silence that enveloped the ridge, so absolute it was almost tactile. Every creak of wood, every rustle of leaves seemed amplified against the unnatural stillness. Attempts to question the family were met with calm defiance. Ezekiel's voice, deep and unwavering, carried an authority that chilled the marrow. The officers returned with reports that were vague, as if the very land conspired to obscure the truth. Those who dared venture closer described scenes that bordered on the surreal. In the heart of the forest clearing, fires burned in a geometric pattern, black smoke twisting toward the moon. Figures moved around the flames with ritual precision, performing actions that combined the domestic with the macabre, kneeling over scorched soil, tracing symbols with knives, and handling the remains of animals with unsettling calm. The air carried a smell that was both coppery and earthy, a mixture that seemed to cling to the lungs and leave a permanent taste of iron and ash. The mystery deepened as visitors reported hearing distant melodic hums that were neither musical nor entirely human. Some swore that the Hollow children's eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting the firelight with an intensity that made onlookers question the limits of human perception. The more the tale spread, the more it became entwined with local superstition. The Hollow clan was spoken of in hushed tones in taverns and general stores, their name a cautionary emblem of curiosity's price. Yet despite the fear, there was a strange allure. Scholars and curious writers traveled from nearby towns, hoping to observe the phenomenon, to understand the methods and beliefs of a family so isolated, so entwined with ritual and fire, that they seemed to exist on a different plane of reality. Letters from these observers spoke of an unsettling equilibrium, terror mingled with a perverse respect for the clan's precision and unshakable devotion to their practices. Every observer left with the impression that this was not mere cruelty or madness. It was a belief system, rigorous, methodical, and terrifying in its implications. As the sun set behind the ridges, the Hollow homestead transformed. Shadows lengthened and merged with the smoke, and the sounds of the forest were swallowed by the ritualistic rhythm of the family. Villagers said that one could almost feel the heartbeat of the land change, synchronize with the flames, and hear the whispers of the past echoing through the present. It was here, in this suspended, trembling twilight, that the stage was set for a story that would weave together fire, death, fear, and the shadowed edges of humanity. The clan of the Hollow was more than a family. They were a living enigma, and their tale was only beginning. The late 19th century in eastern Kentucky was a time of both isolation and subtle unrest. The hills and hollows carved a landscape where communities existed in semi-seclusion, connected by narrow dirt roads and trails that wound between dense forests and rocky ridges. The people who lived here were hardy, shaped by generations of subsistence farming, hunting, and the occasional barter with nearby towns. Life was dominated by the rhythms of nature harvest seasons, hunting cycles, and the relentless demands of raising livestock on terrain that could be as cruel as it was beautiful. Towns were small, often little more than a cluster of wooden buildings. A general store, a post office, and a church that served as both spiritual and social center. Kentucky had emerged from the shadow of the Civil War just decades prior, and its population carried the echoes of conflict in subtle, unspoken ways. Families like the Hollows had roots that ran deep into the soil, their histories interwoven with tales of frontier survival, small-scale conflicts over land, and enduring traditions passed down through generations. Religion was a central pillar in most communities, but in places like the Ridge where the Hollow clan lived, syncretism blending of old folk beliefs with Christian rituals was not uncommon. Appalachia, in particular, had developed a unique cultural identity, where superstition, herbal medicine, and oral traditions coexisted alongside sermons and hymns. Education was sparse, particularly in rural areas. Many children learned reading and writing at home or in small one-room schools, where teachers often doubled as farmers or local tradespeople. Knowledge of natural science, medicine, and hygiene was limited, filtered through a combination of folklore, folk remedies, and the occasional newspaper or traveling lecturer. Epidemics were still a looming threat. Diphtheria, typhoid, and influenza claimed lives periodically, leaving entire families in mourning. Communities were wary of outsiders, partly because of practical concerns strangers might bring disease, theft, or conflict, and partly because isolation had fostered a deep-seated suspicion of anything beyond the familiar. Economically, families like the Hollows were self-reliant but precarious. Farming, hunting, and woodcraft sustained daily life, but harsh winters, poor soil, and occasional crop failures meant that poverty was never far away. Barter and mutual aid among neighbors created social bonds, but those same bonds could be fragile, strained by competition for land, livestock, and scarce resources. Alcoholism and domestic violence were not uncommon, exacerbated by poverty and lack of social services. These hardships, combined with geographic isolation, contributed to a culture where secrecy and suspicion were survival tools. Outsiders who failed to respect local norms often faced cold stares, warnings, or outright hostility. Into this environment, the Hollow clan emerged as both familiar and extraordinary. They were known for their reclusiveness, their eerie precision in daily tasks, and a strict adherence to rituals that outsiders could scarcely understand. In a culture that valued practicality, their obsession with ceremonial fire, esoteric symbols, and the meticulous handling of death was immediately conspicuous. Observers later noted that such behaviors may have roots in Appalachian folk magic, combined with psychological tendencies amplified by isolation. Scholars suggest that in communities with limited social interaction, ritualistic behavior can serve as both a coping mechanism and a means of asserting identity. Medical understanding in the region was rudimentary. Local doctors were often poorly trained, traveling from town to town, and relied heavily on herbal remedies, poultices, and bloodletting. Mental health was rarely discussed, and what we now recognize as psychiatric conditions were frequently attributed to moral weakness, possession, or simply eccentricity. It is within this context that the behaviors of the Hollow clan would have been perceived as unnatural, frightening, and sometimes blasphemous. Their peculiar practices, while rooted in private belief, collided with societal norms that emphasized conformity, religious devotion, and the visible suppression of strange tendencies. Culturally, storytelling and oral history were powerful forces. Tales of ghosts, curses, and unexplained phenomena circulated widely, both entertaining and cautioning the community. These narratives were not considered mere fiction. They were frameworks through which people interpreted the unpredictable world around them: disease, death, natural disasters, and interpersonal conflict. The Hollows, with their enigmatic rituals, became almost mythic figures within these oral traditions. By the late 1880s, the family was not just a household but a symbol, a living story that carried lessons about fear, power, and the consequences of venturing too far from societal norms. Politically, Kentucky was in a period of transition. The Reconstruction era had ended, but social tensions lingered. Economic inequality, disputes over land ownership, and lingering resentment from wartime alignments influenced both public and private life. In rural areas, law enforcement was minimal, and local magistrates or constables often struggled to enforce order over isolated settlements. In such a vacuum, families like the Hollows operated with relative autonomy, their activities largely hidden from official scrutiny. Yet this autonomy also heightened suspicion. Neighbors whispered about unexplained deaths, burned livestock, and strange lights at night. The Appalachian environment itself shaped the family's worldview. Surrounded by forests that could conceal both sustenance and danger, the Hollows developed an intimate knowledge of fire, animal behavior, and the rhythms of the wilderness. In a society that revered both survival skills and spiritual obedience, the Hollows' focus on ritual fire can be interpreted as a convergence of practical knowledge and symbolic meaning. Fire was protection, purification, and power, all in one. Death, ever present in a region where survival was uncertain, became both an inevitability and a subject of ritualistic observation. Taken together, the social, economic, and cultural landscape of 1889 Kentucky created fertile ground for the emergence of a family like the Hollows. Isolation amplified idiosyncrasies into legends. Hardship sharpened rituals into survival mechanisms. Folklore and superstition transformed reality into myth. It is within this matrix of history, culture, and environment that the Hollow clan's story must be understood. Their behaviors, which would later horrify outsiders, were shaped by a complex interplay of circumstance, inherited belief, and human psychology, a dark mirror reflecting the fears, desires, and uncertainties of their world. As the ridge wind whispered through the Hollows, carrying the scent of smoke and damp earth, one could sense that the Hollows were both a product of their time and an anomaly within it. Their story would test the limits of what could be observed, recorded, and rationalized. To understand the clan of the Hollow was to step into the delicate boundary between documented history and the shadowed, untamed spaces of human imagination. The backdrop against which their tale unfolded was as much a character as Ezekiel or his children. A land defined by isolation, endurance, and the ever-present tension between life, death, and the unseen forces whispered about in Appalachian legend. The first truly alarming incident occurred one crisp autumn evening when a neighbor, Samuel Crawford, reported seeing strange flames leaping from the Hollow property. He claimed that the fire formed geometric shapes, triangles, and circles, twisting in unnatural synchrony. Upon closer inspection, Samuel noticed charred remains of animals carefully arranged in ritual patterns. The Hollow children moved silently around the fire, chanting in a language Samuel could not recognize, their faces illuminated by flickering light. The sight left him trembling, and he described the air as heavy, almost oppressive, filled with a metallic scent that clung to the tongue. He fled before Ezekiel could notice, but the image haunted him for months, replaying with every gust of wind that rustled the autumn leaves. Weeks later, another incident brought the local doctor, Jonathan Pierce, into the Hollow homestead. A young goat had been found impaled upon a sharpened stake in the clearing, its body partially burned and symbols scorched into the soil surrounding it. Dr. Pierce, a pragmatic man, attempted to rationalize the scene as some twisted form of superstition combined with animal cruelty. He asked Ezekiel about the axe, but the patriarch only replied in calm, measured tones, insisting that fire purified and that death was not to be feared but understood. The doctor's unease grew, noting the peculiar calm of the children as they observed the ritual, their eyes reflecting an almost clinical detachment that seemed impossible for their age. Not long after, a traveling salesman vanished near the Hollow Ridge. Witnesses reported hearing screams, then silence, followed by smoke curling through the forest. Investigators who later examined the path found scorch marks on the ground and fragments of the man's clothing, but no body. A single note was discovered nailed to a tree. The fire chooses whom it calls. The note was written in precise, almost mechanical handwriting, contrasting with the primal chaos surrounding the ridge. Villagers were terrified, convinced that the Hollows were directly responsible. Though no lawman dared approach the property, another incident involved Ezekiel's own brother, who had come seeking reconciliation over a long-standing land dispute. He was found days later unconscious near a small creek, his hands blistered from what appeared to be self-inflicted burns. When he regained consciousness, he spoke in hushed, fearful tones of chants and shadows moving among the flames. He refused to return to the ridge, but his tale reinforced the growing legend of the Hollow family. Inside the homestead, domestic life mirrored the macabre exterior. Neighbors who observed the property reported glimpses through windows of the family engaged in odd practices, cutting herbs and laying them out in precise patterns, handling knives and axes with meticulous care, and performing actions that resembled both domestic chores and ritualistic ceremony. The children, often barefoot, walked through ash-covered floors, sweeping and tending to small fires as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Their movements were synchronized, eerily precise, and devoid of hesitation, suggesting that they had been trained from an early age to follow strict ritual routines. The Hollow's livestock suffered mysterious fates. Goats, chickens, and even a cow disappeared only to be found later, partially burned or impaled, arranged in patterns that seemed to convey meaning only to the family. One observer, a teacher from a nearby school, noted that the patterns resembled symbolic diagrams he had once seen in an old almanac, perhaps linked to folk practices or primitive esoteric beliefs. He reported feeling a cold dread while trying to analyze them, as though the land itself resisted interpretation. At night, witnesses spoke of hearing music soft, melodic, yet dissonant. Some described it as a hum, others as chanting in a rhythm that seemed to echo the natural cadence of the forest. Travelers who camped near the ridge swore they felt an invisible pressure, a sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Dogs barked incessantly, livestock shied away from certain clearings, and even the wind seemed to carry voices. One farmer described waking to find scorch marks forming a spiral in his own field overnight, leading him to conclude that the Hollow influence extended beyond their property. A particularly chilling incident involved a neighbor boy who wandered too close to the clearing. He later recounted in terrified whispers that he saw the children carrying a small animal on a tray, circling the fire while chanting. He claimed the flames momentarily took on the shape of a human form, twisting and writhing before dissipating into smoke. The boy's testimony, though met with skepticism by some adults, further cemented the notion that the Hollow's activities were not merely strange, but possibly supernatural. Even within the family, accidents and injuries were common, yet they were handled with a detachment that outsiders found horrifying. Knives slipped, axes misused, fire flared unexpectedly, but no cries of pain were heard. Blood was cleaned in ritualistic ways, and the injured were treated with poultices and chants rather than conventional medicine. One of Ezekiel's daughters, while tending to a burning brazier, sustained severe burns on her arm. Rather than panic, she calmly performed a sequence of gestures that seemed both protective and ceremonial, eventually bandaging herself with herbs. Observers later noted that the precision of these actions suggested rigorous training rather than instinct. Over time, patterns emerged in the types of incidents recorded. There was a consistent focus on fire, on geometric arrangements, and on human and animal death in symbolic configurations. Outsiders speculated about the meaning, some drawing connections to ancient pagan rituals, others to psychological theories of obsession and ritual behavior. Still, no single explanation satisfied all observers. The Hollows themselves offered no clarification beyond cryptic remarks. Fire purifies, death instructs, and the land remembers. Perhaps the most disturbing accounts were those describing the family's nocturnal gatherings. One night, a hunter observed all 7 children circling a central flame, moving in perfect synchronization while chanting in a language that seemed to vibrate with the wind itself. He reported seeing shadows detach from the surrounding trees, flicker near the flames, and then retreat into the forest. By the time he had regained his courage to approach, the clearing was empty, save for a single note: "What you see is not for the uninitiated." The hunter never spoke of the event again, but his absence from the ridge for months suggested a lingering psychological impact. The insidious nature of the Hollow clan's influence extended to neighboring families as well. Livestock theft, sudden disappearances, and inexplicable fires were reported across several ridges, leading to growing paranoia. Entire families refused to travel near the Hollow property, and some abandoned homesteads altogether. Letters to the local newspaper described the Hollows as a dark plague upon the land, while others argued that the family was simply misunderstood, a relic of older, more mystical practices that the modern world no longer accommodated. Despite the horror, the pattern of ritual and violence remained controlled, deliberate, and almost theatrical. Each incident, while shocking to outsiders, followed a methodical sequence: arrival, placement of objects, invocation of fire, and a final, silent dispersal. It was as if the entire clan participated in a living choreography that combined domestic routine with ceremonial performance. Those who witnessed it described an unsettling harmony, a dissonant beauty that made the atrocities all the more unforgettable. Even law enforcement, once emboldened by reports of disappearances, found themselves stymied by the precision and isolation of the Hollow homestead. Deputies who attempted investigation often returned with tales of thick, choking smoke, disorienting darkness, and an eerie silence punctuated by distant chants. Every visit seemed to confirm that the family was not merely hiding, it was performing, creating an atmosphere designed to unnerve and to assert dominance over the surrounding land. By the end of the decade, the incidents had become legend, documented in letters, newspaper clippings, and oral histories. Each event, each animal, each fire, each whispered chant added a layer to the story of the clan of the Hollow, a narrative that blended horror, folklore, and social observation. The family's actions were never random. They followed a dark logic, one that outsiders could observe but never fully understand. They existed in a liminal space where fear, ritual, and the natural world converged, leaving a trail of mystery that would captivate and terrify generations to come. The Hollow clan's activities did not remain confined to whispers along ridges and in taverns. As stories of burned livestock, vanishing travelers, and ritualized fires spread, the surrounding community responded with a mixture of fear, fascination, and moral indignation. Families living near the ridge spoke in hushed tones, exchanging accounts of what they had seen and what they feared to see. Children were warned never to approach the Hollow homestead, and even adults treaded lightly on paths near the property, avoiding eye contact and conversation. The presence of the clan became a constant undercurrent of anxiety, shaping daily life with invisible psychological chains. Local clergy expressed particular concern. Pastors visiting the area wrote letters describing the Hollow's behaviors as blasphemous, a dangerous flirtation with what they termed forces of the infernal. Sermons in nearby churches increasingly referenced the clan indirectly, cautioning congregants about the dangers of straying from moral and spiritual guidance. Religious leaders debated whether the Hollows were possessed, misguided, or acting out of some warped inherited tradition. The discussion, though theoretical in writing, had tangible effects. Villagers internalized the fear and treated every unexplained fire or death as potential evidence of the family's malevolent influence. Physicians faced a similar dilemma. Dr. Jonathan Pierce, who had previously witnessed some of the ritualistic injuries, became a reluctant chronicler of the clan's behavior. He documented incidents with meticulous care, noting burn patterns, behavioral anomalies, and the eerie composure with which injuries were handled. Pierce theorized that the family might be operating under some hereditary psychological condition, perhaps a combination of obsessive-compulsive ritual and psychopathy, amplified by extreme isolation. Other doctors were more conservative, attributing the phenomena to superstition, exaggeration, or moral corruption rather than medical anomaly. In any case, the local medical community lacked both the resources and the training to intervene meaningfully. Newspapers seized upon the story, albeit cautiously. Local editors published accounts that balanced fascination with caution, portraying the Hollows as a curiosity, but warning readers against venturing too close. Some accounts were sensationalized, describing the flames as infernal fires and the children as ministers of darkness. Letters to editors reflect a division in public opinion. Some readers demanded legal action, while others suggested leaving the family alone. arguing that interference might provoke further tragedy. The media attention, though limited by the technological constraints of the time, amplified the legend and solidified the hollow's notoriety within regional consciousness. Neighbors reacted in practical and social ways as well. Some families erected fences, cleared additional land to maintain visibility, or stationed guards during nighttime hours. Stories circulated of farmers abandoning homesteads entirely, unwilling to risk the wrath or influence of the Hollow clan. Social ostracization extended beyond the ridge. Merchants refused to sell goods to the family, and some itinerant workers avoided the area altogether. The Hollows, in turn, remained impervious, their interactions with outsiders measured, deliberate, and often unsettlingly polite. Psychological explanations began to surface, even informally. Teachers, clergy, and doctors speculated that the Hollow's behaviors were manifestations of isolation, inherited belief systems, or trauma passed through generations. Folk psychology intersected with nascent scientific inquiry. Villagers described the family as possessed or cursed, while physicians considered hereditary mental disturbances or ritualized obsessive-compulsive behavior. This blending of superstition and scientific thought created a complex web of interpretation, where the clan was simultaneously demonized and analyzed, feared and studied. Family members of neighbors were not immune to the psychological ripple. Nighttime sounds, such as distant chanting or the crackling of fire, were interpreted through the lens of the Hollow legend, producing anxiety, insomnia, and hypervigilance. Children became reluctant to explore forests, adults avoided the ridge, and even casual travelers reported unease when approaching the area. In effect, the clan's presence created a form of social conditioning. The fear itself became an active force shaping behavior and perception. Law enforcement remained cautious. Deputies who visited the property reported sensations of disorientation, pressure in the chest, and a creeping dread that seemed disproportionate to the physical evidence. Their reports, carefully worded, suggested a respect or even a fear of the clan's capabilities, leaving legal intervention inconsistent at best. Courts and local authorities, constrained by the sparse population and limited resources, ultimately deferred to community self-regulation, allowing the Hollow clan to operate with minimal oversight. Letters and diaries from the era reveal a mix of fascination and moral panic. Observers recorded the precision of rituals, the methodical arrangement of burned animals, and the family's unnerving calm. Yet they also noted the impossibility of fully understanding the clan's motivations. Scientific speculation was tempered by superstition. Religious interpretation mingled with medical curiosity. Some concluded that the family represented the extreme outcome of isolation combined with inherited belief, a case study in how environment, culture, and psychology could converge in ways that defied conventional understanding. Occasionally, journalists or scholars attempted to visit the ridge under the guise of inquiry. Their reports emphasize an almost cinematic tension. Shadows lengthened under moonlight. Firelight illuminated silent figures moving with mechanical grace, and every observation seemed to deepen rather than clarify the mystery. Visitors often left with a profound sense of unease, their accounts blending meticulous description with the inevitable subjective impressions of fear and awe. In social terms, the Hollow clan became a cautionary exemplar. Communities used their story to enforce social norms, instructing children on obedience, moderation, and the perils of curiosity. Scholars of the time noted that the legend served a practical function, reinforcing communal boundaries and providing a narrative through which uncertainty, danger, and moral risk could be discussed safely. Even as law enforcement and media coverage grew, the clan's activities remained largely enigmatic, demonstrating the power of isolation, ritual, and reputation in shaping public perception. By the end of the 1880s, the Hollows were less a family than a symbol, a living narrative through which fear, fascination, and social control intertwined. Their influence extended beyond immediate interaction, shaping cultural memory, folklore, and local psychology. The combination of observed ritual, inexplicable incidents, and consistent behavioral patterns created a legacy that was both terrifying and irresistible to outsiders. A story of humanity at the edge of comprehension, where community, superstition, and emerging scientific thought collided in a single enduring tableau. It was a night unlike any other when the Hollow clan reached the apex of their rituals. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds. casting the ridge into a darkness so complete that even familiar trees seemed alien and distorted. The air carried a tension that was almost physical, pressing against the lungs and raising the hairs on the back of the neck. Villagers reported feeling an unnatural stillness, as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for some unseen event to unfold. From a distance, the faint orange glow of multiple fires pierced the darkness, synchronized in a way that suggested deliberate orchestration rather than coincidence. Inside the hollow homestead, Ezekiel moved with absolute precision. Each member of the family had a role, rehearsed over years of ritual practice, and this night would be no exception. The children, gaunt and eerily composed, tended the central flames while arranging objects in patterns whose meaning remained cryptic to all observers. Axes, knives, and even simple farming tools were incorporated into the display, their placement both ceremonial and threatening. The rhythm of the family's movements was hypnotic. One could imagine that the air itself was following their choreography, bending subtly to their will. The first major incident occurred when a traveling peddler, perhaps lured by the unusual glow or drawn by curiosity, wandered too close to the clearing. Witnesses described seeing him stumble into the ritual space, his lantern flickering and casting long, grotesque shadows across the ground. The children did not react immediately. They continued their chanting, their voices rising and falling in a cadence that seemed to shape the smoke into forms resembling human figures. The man froze, captivated and terrified, as if some invisible force held him in place. When Ezekiel finally spoke, his tone was calm, commanding, and absolute. The peddler fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the intensity of the ritual, his own fear becoming part of the ceremony. As the night progressed, the ritual escalated. Fires flared unnaturally, their light twisting into shapes that were almost sentient, flickering across the faces of the participants. Knives and axes were used not in haste or anger, but with deliberate, almost artistic precision. One goat, brought into the clearing, was handled with careful choreography, its placement on a central stone marking the climax of the ceremonial sequence. Every movement, every gesture was performed with the quiet reverence of a deeply ingrained belief. Yet to any outsider it appeared terrifying, grotesque, and unnatural. The natural world itself seemed to respond. Wind gusts carried the sound of distant, echoing footsteps, though no one approached from beyond the ridge. Owls and other nocturnal creatures fell silent, and even the fire seemed to behave unnaturally, its flames twisting against the wind. Observers reported an almost supernatural quality to the scene, a tension that bordered on the hallucinatory. The forest became a stage upon which human fear and ritualistic devotion intersected, creating an atmosphere where reality itself seemed suspended. Neighbors who attempted to intervene were met with psychological resistance rather than physical aggression. One man, a local constable, approached cautiously, lantern in hand, only to find himself frozen in place by the hypnotic cadence of chanting and the sheer intensity of the firelight. His reports later described a sensation of being observed simultaneously by many eyes, both human and something else entirely. Every instinct urged retreat, and the constable fled, leaving behind a story that would terrify those who dared to approach the ridge. The ritual reached its peak when the central flames merged into a single towering blaze. Ezekiel raised his hands and the shadows danced with unprecedented complexity, taking on forms that seemed almost human, writhing and moving in a synchronized frenzy. Observers from a distance described hearing a hum that resonated through the ground, through their bones, as if the ritual itself had physical substance. The children, standing around the central fire, appeared to channel the intensity of the flames, their chanting rising to a pitch that made the hair on the neck and arms stand upright. A particularly dramatic incident involved the sudden ignition of an outlying barn. The fire leapt with alarming speed, consuming hay, wood, and a small herd of sheep. Locals later speculated that the flames had been intentionally guided, a display of the family's mastery over fire and fear. Villagers watched from hidden vantage points, torn between the urge to intervene and the overwhelming sense that interference would be met with unknown consequences. The barn burned completely, yet no one was harmed directly by the flames, a paradox that added to the mystique of the clan's capabilities. The intensity of the night's events was further amplified by weather. A sudden storm broke, wind and rain lashing at the ridge, but the central fire remained impervious, flames twisting unnaturally against the downpour. Lightning struck nearby trees, but the hollow clearing remained untouched, as though protected by some invisible barrier. Observers spoke later of a surreal calm at the center of chaos, the family moving with a detached serenity while the elements raged around them. One of the most horrifying moments occurred when a neighbor's child, lost and frightened, stumbled into the perimeter of the ritual. The family, rather than harming the child, incorporated him into the sequence with deliberate care. He mimicked the movements, unaware of the danger he had narrowly avoided. Observers were both relieved and terrified, witnessing a form of control and precision that transcended ordinary fear. The Hollow Clan's mastery over human behavior, whether through ritual, psychological presence, or sheer intensity, became painfully clear. By the early hours of morning, the ritual began to wind down. Flames died to embers, shadows receded, and the chanting faded into silence. The ridge returned to an uneasy calm, punctuated only by the distant rumble of the storm and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. Those who had witnessed the night's events were left shaken, unable to fully describe the sequence of horror, precision, and eerie beauty they had observed. Reports spoke of both awe and terror, a sense that something extraordinary had been witnessed, yet remained fundamentally incomprehensible. When sunlight finally broke over the ridge, the Hollow Clan appeared almost unchanged. Children swept ash from the clearing. Ezekiel moved with quiet authority, and the homestead exuded a deceptive normalcy. For the villagers, however, the events of the night lingered like a shadow, shaping fear and fascination for months to come. Scholars, journalists, and neighbors all attempted to document the occurrences, but each account was colored by the intensity of observation and the psychological impact of witnessing what could not be fully rationalized. In retrospect, the climax of 1889 became the defining moment in the legend of the Hollow Clan. The combination of ritual, fire, psychological manipulation, and environmental factors created a tableau that transcended ordinary understanding. Every participant, observer, and chronicler noted that the night had felt timeless, suspended between reality and the unknown. The Hollow Clan had achieved a level of orchestration and intensity that would echo through the region's folklore for decades, a testament to the power of isolation, belief, and the human fascination with fear itself. Years passed, yet the ridge where the Hollow Clan lived remained a place of whispered legend. Neighbors recounted tales of distant fires that flickered when no wind stirred, shadows that moved against the natural flow of light, and the occasional hum that seemed to echo from the forest itself. Though the family appeared less frequently in public, the stories of their rituals, mastery over fire, and the eerie composure of their children persisted in the collective memory. Scholars and folklorists later referred to the Hollows as a living intersection of psychology, environment, and inherited belief and enigma that defied simple explanation. The psychological impact on the surrounding community was profound. Villagers reported lingering fear, even generations later, of the ridge and the homestead that had once dominated it. Children were raised with cautionary tales about curiosity and the boundaries of human understanding. Families who had once tolerated minor incursions of superstition found themselves haunted by the Hollow legend, interpreting any anomaly smoke, unexplained animal deaths, or odd sounds in the night as a potential sign of the family's lingering influence. In effect, the Hollows had shaped the social and mental landscape of the region long after direct observation ended medical. Historians and psychologists analyzing the case retrospectively speculated on hereditary conditions that may have influenced the family. Obsessive-compulsive tendencies, ritualized behavior, and detachment from conventional social norms were apparent in contemporary accounts. Yet there remained a mystery. The precision, discipline, and apparent control over environmental variables suggested not just pathology, but an intentional cultivation of ritual as a framework for existence. The fire, central to every recorded incident, was both a tool and a symbol, simultaneously representing purification, authority, and the capacity to terrify. Cultural anthropologists noted that the Hollows' practices reflected a blend of Appalachian folk tradition, Christian symbolism, and perhaps older, forgotten pagan rites. The geometric arrangements, the use of fire, and the integration of human and animal elements suggested a coherent belief system, one that outsiders struggled to comprehend. The rituals themselves may have functioned as both social cohesion for the family and a psychological assertion of power over their environment. Each act of precision, each deliberate pattern, reinforced identity and hierarchy within the clan, while projecting control and fear outward toward the wider community. Speculation about the family's survival or descendants persists to this day. Some suggest that the ritualistic practices ceased with the deaths of key members, leaving the ridge abandoned and overgrown. Others argue that the lineage continued, their methods evolving in secret, their knowledge passed down quietly, away from public scrutiny. Occasional reports of strange lights, inexplicable smoke, or oddly synchronized animal deaths fuel the notion that the influence of the Hollow clan may not have entirely vanished. Such speculation blurs the line between history and myth, leaving open the possibility that the story remains unfinished, waiting for the next witness. The long-term effects on the community included both caution and curiosity. For generations, the Hollow Ridge was avoided, yet it attracted the brave, the inquisitive, and the morbidly fascinated. Travelers, writers, and amateur historians made pilgrimages, hoping to glimpse signs of the past or perhaps experience firsthand the intensity that had defined the clan's existence. Each visit reinforced the legend, ensuring that the Hollow story persisted beyond its temporal origin, carried forward as both cautionary tale and object of fascination. The ambiguity surrounding the clan's motivations and methods invites reflection on broader themes of human behavior. Isolation, belief, and inherited ritual practices can produce results that defy ordinary understanding. The Hollows exemplified how environment and psychology can intertwine, creating patterns of behavior that appear terrifying to outsiders, yet serve a functional purpose within the family. Their story challenges the observer to consider the boundaries between madness and method, fear and respect, reality and legend. Ultimately, the Hollow clan stands as a testament to the power of secrecy and discipline. Their rituals, meticulously preserved and executed, left an indelible mark on both the physical landscape and the cultural memory of the region. The fires they tended, the shadows they cast, and the patterns they inscribed in both earth and psyche remain vivid reminders of humanity's capacity for devotion to forces unseen. The ridge, now quiet and overgrown, still hums faintly in the collective imagination, a space where curiosity meets caution, and where the echoes of fire and death linger long after the flames have died. And so, the story of the Clan of the Hollow concludes not with a resolution, but with a question. What becomes of human obsession when shaped by isolation, fear, and inherited belief? Do such patterns fade with time, or do they persist, hidden yet potent, waiting for those who dare to observe and understand? The ridge remains, a silent witness, and the flames of memory continue to flicker in the minds of those who remember. Whether the clan's descendants still exist, whether the rituals endure in secret, or whether the legend has become self-sustaining in local consciousness, no one can say for certain. The mystery persists, leaving an indelible impression of a family, a fire, and a shadowed Appalachian ridge where history and horror converge.